I had always been curious about the abandoned school at the edge of town. It had been empty for as long as I could remember. People said it was haunted, but I didn't believe in ghosts. Still, something about the place drew me in. One evening, just before sunset, I decided to explore it. The moment I stepped through the broken gate, I felt a chill in the air. The building loomed in front of me, its windows shattered, and the paint peeling off the walls. The air was thick with the scent of decay. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I opened the door, and it creaked loudly, echoing through the empty halls. The inside of the school was dark, with only the fading light of the evening filtering through the broken windows. As I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoed, the sound bouncing off the walls. The further I went, the colder it got, as if the school itself was warning me to leave. Suddenly, I heard another set of footsteps behind me. I stopped, holding my breath, listening intently. The footsteps stopped too. My heart pounded in my chest, but when I turned around, there was no one there. I told myself it was just the echo, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was following me. I continued walking, trying to ignore the unease that was growing inside me. The hallways seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. I felt like I was walking in circles, but I couldn't find my way back to the entrance. The air grew colder with each step, and I could see my breath in front of me. Then I heard the footsteps again, closer this time. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there, but the hallway was empty. The shadows seemed to shift and move, and I started to doubt my own senses. Panic began to set in, and I quickened my pace, hoping to find an exit. But the school felt like a maze, and every turn I made led to another dark, empty hallway. The footsteps were right behind me now, matching my pace. I broke into a run, my heart racing. The sound of footsteps was louder, almost like they were right in my ear. I didn't dare look back. I ran and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how fast I went, the footsteps stayed right behind me. Finally, I found a door and shoved it open. I stumbled into a classroom and slammed the door shut behind me, my hands shaking. The room was dark, with only a few faint rays of light filtering through the cracked windows. Desks were scattered around, covered in dust, and the blackboard had faded writing on it, as if a lesson had been abandoned long ago. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, but then I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I could barely make it out. It was coming from the far corner of the room. I strained to hear it, but the words were impossible to understand. The air in the room grew colder, and I could feel something, a presence, watching me. The whispering grew louder, filling the room, and I felt a cold breeze brush against the back of my neck. I turned around slowly, my heart in my throat, and saw a faint figure standing in the corner. It was barely visible, like a shadow, but I could feel its eyes on me. The door behind me started to rattle, as if someone was trying to get in. I backed away, but the room felt like it was closing in on me. The whispering was in my head now, growing louder, more insistent. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, and the figure in the corner seemed to be getting closer, even though it wasn't moving. The door burst open, and the footsteps entered the room. I backed into the corner, trapped, the whispering filling my ears, drowning out my thoughts. The last thing I saw was the shadowy figure looming over me, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying outside the school, the sun just beginning to rise. The building was quiet, the door closed, as if nothing had happened, but I knew I would never forget the echoing footsteps, or the cold, whispering voice that had followed me through the darkened halls. The story of the abandoned school was a favorite among the townspeople. They said there was a classroom in the school that wasn't supposed to be there. Anyone who entered it would never leave. I had always been fascinated by urban legends, so one night I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and a healthy dose of skepticism, I made my way to the school. The building was a crumbling mess, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. I pushed open the rusty gate and stepped onto the overgrown lawn. The air was still, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my feet. The front door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. Inside, the school was dark and silent. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of mold was overwhelming. I turned on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The hallways were lined with old lockers, some of them hanging open, their contents long gone. I wandered the halls, searching for the mysterious classroom. The school seemed endless, a labyrinth of twisting corridors and empty rooms. I started to wonder if the stories were true, if there really was a classroom that shouldn't exist. Then I found it. At the end of a long hallway, there was a door that I hadn't noticed before. It was slightly open, and the number on the door was so faded that it was impossible to read. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was in perfect condition, unlike the rest of the school. The desks were neatly arranged, and the blackboard was clean, as if someone had just finished teaching. I walked to the front of the room and saw an old notebook lying on the teacher's desk. I picked it up and flipped through the pages, but they were all blank. As I stood there, the lights in the room began to flicker. I looked up, and the walls seemed to close in around me. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath in the cold air. Then I heard it, a low humming sound coming from the walls. It grew louder, turning into a strange, eerie chant. I turned around and saw that the desks were no longer empty. Figures sat in them, their faces hidden in shadow, their eyes glowing faintly. Panic gripped me, and I ran to the door, but when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, but it was as if the door was glued shut. The chanting grew louder, filling the room, and the shadowy figures began to move. They turned towards me, their eyes burning with a cold, unnatural light. I backed away from the door, my heart racing. The figures rose from their seats and started to move towards me, their chanting growing louder, more intense. I could feel the walls closing in, the air thick with the sound of their voices. I pressed myself against the door, desperate to escape, but it was useless. Just when I thought it was over, the chanting suddenly stopped. The room was silent, the figures gone, and the door swung open on its own. I didn't waste a second. I bolted out of the room, running as fast as I could down the hallway. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath. I looked back at the school, half expecting to see the door open behind me, but it was gone. The hallway where I had found the classroom didn't exist anymore. The building seemed to loom over me, its dark windows staring back at me like empty eyes. I knew then that the stories were true. The classroom that shouldn't exist was real, and I had barely escaped it. The next day I tried to find the school again, but it was as if it had vanished. The empty lot where it once stood was overgrown with weeds, and no one in town seemed to remember the stories. But I remembered, and I knew that somewhere, in some forgotten corner of the world, that classroom was still waiting, ready to trap the next unlucky soul who dared to enter. The old school had been abandoned for years, left to decay on the outskirts of town. I passed by it every day on my way to work. and each time I felt a strange pull towards it. People said it was haunted, that you could hear children laughing and playing in the middle of the night. It sounded ridiculous, but there was something about the place that I couldn't shake. One day I decided to take a closer look. It was late in the afternoon, and the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the empty playground. The gates were rusted shut, but I managed to squeeze through a gap in the fence. The playground was overgrown with weeds, and the swings creaked in the wind. The merry-go-round was still, its paint chipped and faded. As I walked across the playground, I could feel the temperature drop. A cold breeze brushed against my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. Then I heard it. A faint giggle, like a child's laughter. I stopped, straining to hear, but the sound was gone. I told myself it was just the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I moved closer to the swings, and that's when I saw them. Small footprints in the dirt, leading towards the entrance of the school. They were fresh, like someone had just been there. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me. I followed the footprints, each step taking me closer to the old, crumbling building. The front doors of the school were slightly open, and I could hear the sound of children playing inside. It was faint, almost like an echo, but it was there. I stepped through the doors, and the sound stopped abruptly. The inside of the school was dark, the air thick with dust. The walls were covered in faded drawings, the kind kids would make with crayons. I could barely make them out in the dim light. The footprints led me down the hallway, deeper into the school. The sound of children playing was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. My footsteps echoed in the empty halls, and I started to regret coming here. The further I went, the more the air seemed to grow heavy, as if the building itself was alive, watching me. Finally, the footprints led me to a large room at the end of the hallway. The door was wide open, and inside, the air was even colder. The room looked like a gymnasium, but it was empty, except for a few old dusty mats on the floor. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. The sound echoed through the room, and I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I saw them, faint, shadowy figures moving around the room. They looked like children, playing games, but they weren't normal. They were made of shadows, barely visible in the dim light. I stood frozen, watching as they ran around, their laughter echoing off the walls. It was a twisted version of the laughter I had heard outside, and it sent a chill down my spine. One of the figures stopped suddenly and turned towards me. Its eyes were empty, hollow, and its face was twisted into a grimace. The other figures stopped too, and they all stared at me, their laughter turning into whispers. The whispers grew louder, filling the room, pressing in on me from all sides. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, freezing me in place. I backed away, trying to reach the door, but the figures started moving towards me. Their whispers grew louder, more urgent, like they were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand. Panic set in, and I turned and ran, but the door was gone. The walls of the room seemed to close in, trapping me. The whispers were in my head now, louder and louder, until I couldn't think. Just when I thought I was about to lose my mind, the whispers stopped. The room was silent, the figures gone, and the door was back. I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of the room, running as fast as I could down the hallway. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath, my heart racing. I looked back at the school, half expecting to see the shadowy figures in the windows, but the building was silent, empty. The playground was still, the swings creaking softly in the wind, but I could still hear it, the faint sound of children playing, just at the edge of my hearing, like an echo from the past. I never went near that school again. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the laughter. It's faint, almost like a memory, but it's there, just out of reach, waiting for someone else to come and play. Those were just a few of the many ghostly encounters that lurk in the shadows of the old school. If you want more spine-tingling stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join me next time. And who knows, maybe one day you'll have your own story to tell. Stay haunted, everyone.